You don't need to be a celebrity to be a podcaster. What you need to be is a storyteller. Someone who thinks in audio because you want to create an experience for your listeners. Like using music to make a point. Or planning the story arc of multiple episodes. Or taking a 2-hour interview and distilling it to 20 minutes of key insights. If this sounds nerdy, well, it is. We talk to experts who can nerd out about a topic, and we get nerdy about production too.
I'm Mark, and I can make people sound like they're in a car,
at a basketball game,
even in outer space.
Carl here. When I'm not working on the business side, sometimes I get to record music for our audio beds.
I'm Pam of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. With Puma Podcast, I dug through 30 years of our archives to write the award-winning True Crime Pod, Super Evil.
Ako si Macy. I started out as a junior producer. Now, I produce and host my own show.
Puma Podcast kami. Kayo na rin!
Asia 21, I would say, is a global family of dreamers and thinkers.
Very diverse individuals who are individually quite accomplished.
People that when you meet them, you get inspired by them.
Incredibly smart, but incredibly humble people
that are working on some of the most pressing issues in their respective countries.
Who have a common heartbeat about making this world a better place, not just by their own strength and their talents, but by the ability to work together.
I am Asia 21.
Mama Asia Viseka Sangdane Tatna
Asia 21.
Asia 21. Ma Asia 21.
我是亚洲阿亚本人。
私はアジア。
Hi, kamusta? Ito po si Robbie Alampay ng Puma Podcast. Kung nanonood kayo ngayon, siguro gusto mo rin ng pagbabago. Ang tanong, paano nga ba? The late Chito Gascon dedicated his life to defending democracy and human rights. Although many people know him as the chairperson of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, he started his career as a student leader, as a youth organizer. He had a strong and abiding faith in reform and in the power of the youth to make it all happen. It's in that spirit that 4 organizations have come together. Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, Bukas Conversations for Action, and Youth Leadership for Democracy, or YouthLED. You're watching Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. This is the Chito Gascon Leadership Series. In each episode, we've had 3 so far, you'll hear from people who have led the way for their generation, and then a panel to join them of next generation leaders who will discuss the challenges we face today. In today's episode, The Long Fight for Our Planet, we tackle an issue of immense importance to the world and to the country, specifically climate change. Now, we'll have a number of panelists today, and I'll just jump into it with the different people we've invited, and let me introduce them one by one, and join me here on our virtual stage for our conversation. Joining us is Billie Dumaliang, a trustee and a co-founder of a place you may all, maybe some of you may already be familiar with, the Masungi Geo-Reserve. Yes, that's right, that Masungi. Billie is a founder. This is a project dedicated to conserving the 60-million-year-old limestone pinnacle karst formations. Habang sabihin, but you already have that in your mind, what we're talking about. And Masungi provides refuge for local biodiversity in the Philippines, supported by low-impact development, geotourism, and educational experiences. This is a 430-hectare project. A lot of us have had the pleasure. If you still haven't, you should have that pleasure of that privilege and that experience also of going through Masungi. Our other panelist is going to be Greg Perez. She is Director of Exchange Philippines. Exchange is an impact-first investor and incubator for early-stage social enterprise in the Philippines. Greg, in particular, works closely with entrepreneurs of Exchange portfolio companies. They really incubate a lot of impact entrepreneurial ventures for the ecosystem. And she's lead for Impact Pioneers Network. That's the first Impact Angel Network in the Philippines, and was a delegate to the Gender Smart Investing Summit. Greg was also Executive Director of Gifts and Graces for Fair Trade Foundation. Again, that's a social enterprise that provides product design and market access to artisans and micro manufacturers in the Philippines. And then we have attorney Lesley Cordero. Just like Greg, Lesley is an Asia 21 young leader. So she's a young leader fellow of Asia Society. And she's founding executive senior disaster risk management specialist for the World Bank Disaster Risk Management Program. There they manage more than $1 billion in disaster risk management program in the Philippines. She worked on innovative policies and instruments such as disaster recovery frameworks, emergency cash transfers, resilient infrastructure programs, local government catastrophe risk insurance, and so on. A lot of things to do, of course, with not just the environment, but its impact on our safety, as well as, if we don't mitigate against it, our vulnerability, really. And then finally, we'll have Tricia Aquino. She is Chief Content Officer with us in Puma Podcast. Tricia has overseen production of more than 40 shows since 2019. And before that, she was a reporter at TV5's news website, Interaction. And Tricia has really done a lot of wonderful things, covering for us, a lot of award-winning things, actually, covering for us environmentalists, and really the risks that they face out in the field. So, Billie, Lesley, Greg, and Tricia, welcome dito sa Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago.
Hi, Robbie. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
So we'll jump straight into this. Our conversation is really about our environment, how to save our planet. And ang design nitong kung gusto mo na pagbabago is, as we've said, it's an intergenerational conversation. So I want to start it off with, well, Lesley and Greg. Let me just presume that apart from myself, you've been on this planet longer than our other two panelists. But let me start with this question. What's changed in the Philippine environment? From the time na nakagisnan nyo hanggang ngayon, what's changed in our environment, in our natural resources, both in terms of their state and also in terms of our appreciation and our protection for it?
I'll try to go ahead. Okay lang, Greg?
Yeah, sure, please.
So I could still recall very concretely na growing up, I grew up in Cebu, and then I always go back to Surigao and Siargao Island because my father is from there. So early 2000, we go there and you can see the level na pristine pa yung dagat, wala masyadong tao, and wala masyadong development in terms of resorts as well as tourists. But I appreciated the serenity and the calm in going to those beaches sa Siargao. Fast forward, now when we travel, recently, 2018 onwards, we see a lot of tourists. And together with the tourists, you see a lot of trash. And you can also feel that yung mga corals before, the biodiversity, yung mga fish, yung mga whatever you see underwater, nag-iiba din sila because of the number of tourists that go there. And recently, I visited Siargao Island again because they were struck by Typhoon Odette last December. And nakakaawa because sa dami ng mga resorts, you can see the level of devastation sa resorts as well as the resources. And when we did some snorkeling, nasira din yung mga corals, di ba? And yung mga fish, mas konti na lang. So I think crucial to understand how the evolution happened in a span of, let's say, 10, 15 years. And the challenge right now for tourists like us is how do we take care of these resources when we visit these islands and destinations? So I'll stop there and maybe others would have their insights also.
Yeah, I remember I had the same experience with Boracay. No? I was there. I won't say when. Pero wala pang kuryente. So I was in grade school yata. And, pristine, beautiful, and now it's, kind of heartbreaking. So yeah, definitely that has changed. And, we're still confronted by these two kind of tensions, right? Development and moving forward versus taking care of the earth, which I would argue, one of the good things I think is that people are more aware now versus before. I've had some conversations where primarily because of COVID also, which has been kind of a big eye-opener, where people are now thinking about what's the carrying capacity of an island, of a tourist spot, right? Rather than just having everybody, come one, come all. And so that has changed. In terms of my work, we're seeing more entrepreneurs trying to solve this problem. And it's really a frontier sector. We're not seeing a lot of enterprises there at this point, but we're seeing some energy, so that's great. But at the same time, a lot has not changed in terms of how we deal with disasters and kind of the short-term thinking, right? Where we know that we will have X number of storms every year, and yet somehow we still get caught flat-footed. And so in terms of our response to it, that's still definitely something that has not progressed or evolved as much.
But I just want to ask Lesley, and Greg Darren, when you say pristine, that's one side of what we on our part we remember, but it's also one part of what we use as peg, almost on a romantic level, diba? Yeah. Na walang tao, but we really mean walang tourists, may tao, no? So I was wondering, talk to us also about that side. Yung kinagisnan mo ang Siargao, for example, nung bata ka na walang tao. What was it like for the people there? Because the other side of this, and the other side to the argument also for tourism, is it generates jobs, it helps in development. Para may baseline din tayo, what did development, or for that matter, poverty look like in those times when the islands were quote-unquote pristine?
Yeah. Back in the 90s, 2000s, I think lesser yung available na job and very basic. So people are going to the sea to fish, or they do farming to have food, diba, on their tables. Now, fast forward, you see more people engaged in various tourism enterprises. Then you see the tourist guides, you see a few enterprises, micro, small, and medium enterprises in the area. And then there's a hustle and bustle that's in the area that you can feel with tourism booming. But I think there should be a balance because you want that level of calm and peace when you also go and visit those areas. So I think kailangan in developing a tourism destination, you also look at how do you involve the communities, diba? So they can also participate and earn and benefit from the number of tourists. And on the other side, how do you protect the resources in the island? Greg talked about the carrying capacity. There are ways, there are engineering interventions as well as other interventions that can be added in doing this. I'll talk about our project because I'm leading a project right now with the Department of Tourism and the Tourism Infrastructure Enterprise Zone Authority, or TIEZA. Ito yung tinatawag na Sustainable, Inclusive, and Resilient Tourism Project. So right after the closure of Boracay, Rob, ang ginawa ng DOT and TIEZA was to think about ways on how to not just shut down a destination, but how do you start managing the tourism growth and managing the area. So tatlong areas yung destinations ng World Bank. Ito yung Bohol, Siargao, and Siquijor. And then the ADB is taking on Coron, El Nido, and Baguio. And I think with this template, they're hoping that they can be used in other destinations also.
See, I think si Billie can fast forward us into this conversation because yung sa Masungi, I don't know exactly how it's set up, no? But clearly, from the very start, it's a much more controlled place to get in and out of. I mean, people can tour, but it's also a controlled, very organized tour. I guess I'll prompt you, Billie, and maybe Greg, you have insights also on this. Na, still on the theme of what has changed. What has changed in just in terms of opening up tourism and opening up to tourists? What has changed in the mindset from let's say from the 90s to now? What has changed both for the good and for the better?
Yeah, so I think in Masungi we introduced this concept of geotourism, right? There's many ideas of what ecotourism is in the Philippines. Some people think na basta may falls or may mountain, that's already ecotourism. So we wanted to introduce a more deliberate kind of tourism, which is geotourism, which enhances the character, the natural character of a place, while helping the well-being of the people and communities around it. So meron kaming emphasis on quality over quantity, which is very important and related to the carrying capacity concept that Greg and Ms. Lesley discussed. So yeah, we're very strict with what we do. Everything is reserved. You have to request for a visit. You can't just book or pay for a visit. You need to have the proper mindset and purpose for coming in. It's not just for adventure. It is for education. It is for awareness. So when we opened the trails actually in 2015, more than to raise funding, it was to raise awareness of why we need to conserve this very threatened place. It's severely threatened by quarrying, illegal logging, and land grabbing. So yung tourism is not just, a funding, resourcing measure. It's something that will sustain the area.
That's a good point. Parang pagka nag-register ka tsaka nagbayad ka, there's already implicit is already a an educational, if not a reminder component na there's a reason ba't ka namin pinapagbayad at saka ba't ka namin pinapa-register. Even before you have access, there's already that mindset.
Yes, there's mindset setting that you can't just walk in. You have to be ready for this kind of experience. You have to be ready to be in Masumi. So I think that's what we hope to change from before. We hope to introduce something different in the way that we implement tourism. And finally, tourism is a vehicle. It's a powerful vehicle to advance something as important as biodiversity conservation and the related topic of the climate crisis, diba? Because we're doing this, we have this tourism in Masumi. We talk to visitors about the issues on the ground. These are not just concepts in their heads. These are things that you can see, yung deforestation, yung mining threats, violence to environment defenders. That's coming from our own story. So, one-on-one, nakakausap namin yung mga tao, nakakausap namin yung kabataan, kung ano ba yung na-experience ng mga kagubata natin or a forest on the ground. So,
speaking of which, Tricia, I know personally the things that you've done, the stories that you've done, but tell us about the stories that continue, especially on the side of environmentalists and on the side of people just wanting to educate people about the environment and what has changed or not at all have not changed when it comes to the stories that we are covering with regards to the environment, the need to protect them, and the need to protect the protectors.
Okay, so ang sasagutin ko muna yung napansin kong pagbabago these days in relation to what Billie was saying. Ang napansin kong trend these days bilang isang ordinaryong mamamayan na connected sa digital world, yung mga consumers, at least the more affluent ones, mas aware na kami sa choices namin ngayon at mas intentional na yung pagpili namin ng mga binibili namin. Tulad nga nung sinabi ni Billie na pre-reserved yung visits to Masungi, may mga online stores na rin na you pre-order the item that you want, tapos saka lang nila ipoproduce. Kaya nababawasan yung waste. Wala kang kailangang sunugin na toneladang mga damit kasi hindi mo na siya pwedeng ibenta next season. And people are more intentional about the experiences that they go on. Parang imbes na bumili ng more, meron ding premium on, I take this experience, I go on this experience instead, or I travel instead. Like yun nga, ang dami kong mga kabarkada at kapamilya na nakapunta na sa Masungi. Nag-uuso yung minimalism. People are going plant-based because they know that large-scale meat production is harmful to the planet. But talking about the stories that we produce at Puma Podcast, we have done a lot of stories on the risks that our environmental defenders face. We know that they're being red tagged. We know that they're being killed because they advocate against coal, etc. for the sake of quote unquote progress. And siguro yung isa sa mga pinaka-proud ako na nagawa nating storya sa Puma Podcast ay yung ginawa natin last year na 3-part na podcast on the ethnobotanist Leonard Ko. And we know that he was killed supposedly in a crossfire between the military and the NPA. And over 10 years ago nang nangyari ito. Pero nung nilabas natin yung storya, may paki pa rin yung mga tao at nabuhay yung issue. And sa tingin ko, nagawa natin yun kasi yung atake natin, hindi parang straight news lang na what, when, where, how, why. Hindi lang ito yung facts. But we wrote it in a way na makabagbag damdamin. We didn't shy away from the drama of it because meron talagang isang mabuting tao na malaki ang ambag sa agham sa Pilipinas, napaka unassuming if you watch his videos taking his students on treks. He loved to take pictures of every plant and animal that he came across. Tapos biglang pinatay. So we gave this story a true crime podcast treatment, and we know that. It's one of the most popular genres today. So ginamitan natin ng dramatic music, ng sound effects para ma-heighten yung emotions. Meron tayong script that felt human. Or talaga nagbubuhat ako ng sarili kong bangko kasi ako yung nagsulat nito. Pero inedit nyo naman, sir. And I think it worked. People were messaging me about it. People were tweeting us. Yun.
It's amazing, Tricia. I mean,
thank you. Please listen to it.
I haven't listened to it, but I know someone who was with Leonard that day who survived.
Oh my gosh.
So
Sino to? Ito ba yung forester?
Nino, yeah, the forester. So yeah, I mean that's such a huge topic, and I just want to raise na right now, shots were fired to the party of Kaloydi in Bukidnon, including two environmentalists. Si Roy and si David, who is a member of our watershed coalition. So kanina,
are they safe?
They're safe, but one Datu died and several were hit. So, oh my God, the situation talaga of environment defenders in the country is crazy. That this is happening to them. Actually, tumaas yung balahibo ko because we were just starting this podcast about human rights, and this just happened right when we started, and it just reminded me of what we experienced also last year during the pandemic na dinaril din kami and pinagbubugbog yung rangers namin. So,
oh my gosh,
I'm really thankful that you were, sharing those kind of stories and mainstreaming it. Mainstreaming it is important. A lot of scientists, conservationists, nahihiya to share what they found, what the recommendations are, but the key to that is publicizing what's happening, and that's how we get more people in the cause.
Speaking of intergenerational, I'm older than everybody else, but let me bring it back to the World Bank, for example. The whole concept of community acceptance by the World Bank really has real roots in the Philippines. The killing of Pakling Dulag over the Chico River, Chico Dam controversy in the 1970s really spurred the World Bank and development agencies to say that you cannot have people getting killed. And you can have debates, diba? And you can have both sides, but you cannot have people getting killed over a fight over resources, whether to protect or to pursue development. But let me bring it back to that, Lesley, in terms of striking that balance, as you said, and as Greg said, there is that tension, whether it's in terms of policies or whether it's in terms of innovations in interventions or even investment. What has moved forward and what is hopefully getting developed even better, so that there is at least a safe space for both sides of this equation to be handled more soberly, as well as still as responsibly as we could.
Right. Rob, tama yung minention mo na historical background in terms of environmental consciousness, putting in more safety nets and highlighting the role of the community and the people who will be affected on certain developments. But I'd like to highlight na yung sinabi ni Billie and ni Tricia na it's crucial to tell these stories and to capture the narratives and to have a face behind this situation, because then people will take notice. So World Bank, what we do is in the projects, sometimes especially yung mga infra projects that will have impact sa community, ang daming environmental safety nets and the consultation, having that convening power to bring people to the table and talk. And we have seen this being done, but with this, I think, administration, we had a different experience, but we still try. My level of pushback on certain things, because sometimes some agencies would be very straightforward in saying, this is what we want, take it or leave it, right? But as the lender, having the money, having that power to also bring other people to the table and have that conversation.
But where is that pushback coming from? I mean, I imagine it's not just, dahil brusko kami or matigas ulo namin or ayaw namin makinig. I mean, I tend to assume that there is good faith argument in everything. But what's the good faith argument for them saying, no, we really want to do this?
I think yung mindset na it's easier, it's faster if we do it our way. Diba? Kasi parang tried and tested. And if it's hard infra, feeling nila it's just parang cement, mortars, yung mga ganun lang. Diba? And it's civil works. But behind those civil works, diba, ano yung social impact? Ano yung environmental impact? So our specialists sa environment and social safeguards team would say na, oops, we need to take a step back. We need to consult the people who will be affected. Have we taken efforts in talking to them? Diba? And more, you can see if World Bank is taking the lead, the other development partners would also have put certain standards in doing that. And there is value in collaborating with the other partners. And
Robbie, can I just
I just want to prompt Greg, because when you say development partners, I'm imagining other development agencies. But one key partner here obviously is the private sector. So Greg, ang gusto ko malaman is, where do investors and the private sector find themselves? Because I imagine in the scenario that Lesley is talking about, I'm imagining, let's say, an LGU saying we want to open up tourism, therefore we want an airport, and we want a highway straight from Manila, straight to our province. Let's build a bridge so that we can have 20,000 tourists a day, and so on. The development agencies are saying, wait, we need to do this responsibly. There's a process. In the middle are the private sector players who you would like to presume have a progressive way of thinking and so on, but at the other hand, are also waiting for contracts to be handed out. Diba? So where does the private sector sit in, and what's the mindset right now in the private sector and among investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, business is about generating a surplus, right? But we're seeing a sea change now where businesses are now not just looking at, before it was primarily shareholder, the shareholder was the primary stakeholder, right? So it was about increasing the share price, it was about profits, and that has led us down this unsustainable path of an extractive economy and people killing this violence because they want to protect these assets. It's a rent business model, right? Where they're protecting these assets so that they continue to earn from it and extract whatever they can from it. And that's why many of our, progressive laws, I guess, that were good in intention have not really progressed because at every turn, those with vested interests are blocking the way. So in terms of, how do we choose these right partners? Definitely appreciate, the power of the World Bank. And we're seeing that also as investors. We have that power and that responsibility to, there is a tendency that what gets funded gets built. And so as investors, you really have to have that kind of mindset and choose the right people who have this mentality. And another thing to add, back to the points earlier around the community, and you were asking, parang why is there pushback and ayaw namin? Sobrang sunog na sila. Sobrang people have gone to the areas, to the communities and said, we want to help, and then actually gagamitin lang sila. Or nandun sila for 5 years and then they're gone. And it's not real, right? And so now, parang how do you distinguish what's real and what's not? So for the longest time, they haven't had a seat at the table. So, and that's true not just in the development world, diba? I mean, NGOs, ganyan. We joke about it's, they have a square solution looking for a round peg. Or, even some social entrepreneurs, they go to the area presuming we know best. But there's it's not participatory. They're not asking, what do you want?
Give me an example without having to name names. Give an example. Any one of you can give me an example of a square solution looking for a round peg or for a round hole. Something that even good intentions led them down the wrong path.
In the development world, dami, di ba? These toilets in India na hindi naman ginagamit. And I was in a conversation with somebody from an international NGO, I won't say na who, and they admitted it, na parang they did a project in one area.
Yeah,
they did a project in one area, tapos they tried to transpose it to another area without contextualizing it and asking the community what has been tried, what have you done, what are your aspirations. It kind of reminds me of this parable na this fisherman, right? And then this businessman came and, why don't you double the number of boats? Why would I do that? So that you can earn more income. Why would you do that? Why would I do that? So that you can lie around on the beach all day and relax. So, I mean, I'm living the life that I want, right? We're not saying that progress is bad, but let's ask them. Diba? I mean, what's important is the safety nets.
I imagine in somewhere in between in all of these things we're trying to reconcile, this term comes in. I have a vague idea what it means, I think. But what does impact investment actually mean? What does that what does that actually mean? How is that different
that's a fair
from investment?
Question. Yeah. So investment is basically you want maximum return. So kind of the term would be seeking alpha, which is, the highest return possible, right? But impact investment, that's a whole spectrum where exchange is sitting. We're on the impact first, meaning when we invest, we are expecting that out of our investment will come social returns. And when we say social returns, that means that the enterprise baked into their business model are solving a specific social problem. It can be access to energy. It can be education, democratizing education. It can be renewable energy. In the Philippines, right, we're very ripe for all these innovations and experiments. And so that's one end of the spectrum where you're investing for impact versus traditional investing where you're just investing for return. But there is that other end of the impact investing spectrum where you are investing for both impact and return. So I hope that was kind of a short.
But I'm sorry to just be thinking just in terms of the money, but I just want to understand the model because we're trying to understand motives, diba? For people wanting to do the right thing. If I append the term impact to my term investment, what does that get me in terms of, does that get me additional capital? Does that get me additional support? Can I apply for a grant from the World Bank or ADB or any development agency? Does that open doors to me, to the LGUs? And does that actually mean more profit for me at the end of it? Just to be very, very blunt about it, what's the value? Because for a time, what I kept hearing was social enterprise.
Yeah.
And that sort of died down as well. Is impact investment basically just a rebranding of social enterprise? Not to diminish the real intentions here, diba? But is it a different person? Is it a different kind of person who goes into impact investment than just straight out investment?
So you mean on the entrepreneur side?
Yeah, on the entrepreneur side.
What would you get?
And on the motive side, let's just be very...
Yeah, so on the motive side, there are many different ways many reasons why you would get into impact investing. One is because, it might be that you're an entrepreneur yourself. One, you have to believe in the power of entrepreneurship, right? And that entrepreneurship, because of its innovation and because of, questioning why not. So there are many, many things that, we are telling people, it's always been done this way, or don't try that, or, whatever. It cannot be done. And entrepreneurs ask the question, why not? Why can't I try it this way? And they're not afraid to fail. And they're not afraid to try new things. And so that's why, if you are, first of all, a believer in that power of entrepreneurship to bring about innovation and not just incremental change, but to leapfrog, really change systems, then that would be a vehicle for you. And then if you're looking at specific impact, then you're thinking of how do I change the educational system and not just, providing one piece of it, but also because entrepreneurship is also bringing different stakeholders together, bringing different resources to bear. That doesn't mean that ikaw magagastos sa lahat, ikaw gagawa ng lahat. I think that's one of the challenges of entrepreneurs because there are so many gaps they tend to take on everything, right? But also, I want to address kind of what you were saying. Entrepreneurship or impact entrepreneurship doesn't mean that you don't make money. So you can be a for-profit, but you can also be a non-profit. That's also, you can be an impact enterprise. But the whole idea behind impact entrepreneurship, why you would also get into it, is that so you're not beholden to an agenda that comes with a person who funds your project. And no offense to funders out there, right? But I came from a small NGO, and they were doing great work, but they always ended up chasing after the money and doing programs that were not necessarily aligned. And so we ended up in some kind of mission drift, because you need the money. You need to, you've already hired your social workers, etc. And so impact entrepreneurship, if you find that business model that generates a surplus and allows you to make money and expand and scale, then it's your agenda and what you want to do. And you can experiment as much as you want without anyone saying, why are you doing it that way, right?
Yeah. Lesley, you talked about and you acknowledged kanina the power of stories, diba? That it's important for us to craft these stories, not just to humanize, but also to explain. When I was growing up, it was to be an environmentalist was simply to say, hindi, ano ko for total lagban ako. And then I became a reporter. I covered the DNR for a number of years when the whole debate was whether to have a total log ban, and other people saying, no, that won't work because you're totally keeping people out of the equation. What other aspects do you think where storytellers like Tricia and NGOs and media and all of us, even investors, really can do a better job at telling stories, not just to humanize, but so that people also understand the dynamics of how the world really works?
Right. So interesting, Rob, that you brought that up, because I think kailangan din mag-evolve yung storytelling, di ba? One key thing that is crucial, and you leverage on development partners or research institutions or academia, is the data and the information. So important na factual, and then how do you tell your story and weave the facts into the story to make it more interesting? And then the creative aspect of bringing in social media and understanding your medium or channel. Kasi, di ba, with the noise and all the platforms that are available, how do you capture the attention of the people? Understanding your market or your audience also is important. But what is important also is getting your facts and information straight. So having pros and cons and telling that story properly. Getting development communication experts and people who are also willing to evolve in terms of their storytelling. I remembered 2 weeks ago in the Outstanding Young Men awarding for 2021, I bumped into Attorney Tony Oposa. And you all know him, right? And he told me a story na 20 years ago, ang battle cry niya for intergenerational responsibility and justice was to file cases. So, nandun siya sa aspect na kung merong masamang nangyari, merong violation on the environment or yung climate justice, file a case against his people.
That's why Tony is the father of Writ of Kalikasan.
Right. And I was part of that young pool of volunteer lawyers para sa global legal action against climate change. And 15 years after, nung we bumped into each other, ang kwento niya is nag-evolve na rin daw siya. And na-realize niya the power of telling positive stories and good stories. Highlighting kung anong nangyari, but ano yung positive impact, ano yung mga ginagawa ng mga ordinary people like us. And having to amplify those stories because people are looking also for authenticity and sometimes pagod na sila sa negative news. It's not about not putting what is bad, what is ugly, what is negative out there, but finding also a positive spin towards it. So I think nagre-respond yung mga tao right now kasi punong-puno na sila sa negativism. So sabi niya, tell those good stories and find an angle where people would listen. And I think that's also the power of the evolution of storytelling and finding those narratives.
Yeah, but not just finding those narratives. I'm sure a lot of those the things, as you said, resonate very much with Tricia. And you know, I work with Tricia. I've been working with her for many years, and I know that, you know, in a way, the storytelling, we have formulas for it. We know how to do it. But among the things that you said is really, Tricia, maybe you could speak to this. One of the hardest things is actually getting the data. Diba? Parang, where do you, tell us the experience, Tricia. On the one, we want to tell those stories, but Tricia, tell us, how is it nowadays? I don't know. During my time, especially hindi pa digital, yung, I remember before when I was covering logging concessions and PLAs in the DNR, and I would ask for information. They would send me to a room where with all the binders of all that, and then bahala ka, yan, may access ka. Diba? And even now, when everything is digitalized, you don't necessarily know where to start. Ikaw, Tricia, ano experience mo when you do your research, and even when you want to do good news stories?
Sa tingin ko, lahat ng reporter na experience yung tatawag ka dun sa office, sa government office, tapos pagpapasa-pasahan ka ng iba't ibang department. So yun pa lang, ang hirap kumuha ng data. Napaka-poorly maintained kung meron man nung ating mga data repository sa Pilipinas. Pero ang sasabihin kong pinaka-sagabal sa pagkuha ng data ay yung actual na threat to the lives of journalists covering environmental issues na actually ako nga, shielded pa ako from that kasi hindi ko kailangan pumunta sa field kasi for that Leonard Co story in particular, I just interviewed a number of his colleagues in UP, scientists, his daughter, someone from the CHR, someone from Greenpeace, etc. So I didn't put myself out there para barilin ako ng militar or ng some armed group thinking na I'm encroaching upon their territory. Actually, one of my editors back in Interaction, at the time the news website of TV5, actually sent me to cover the land grabbing issue at Masumi. And sobrang takot na takot akong pumunta doon. That was maybe 2015, 2014. Takot na takot ako kasi alam ko na yung initial research that I got was meron talagang nagbabarilan doon sa lugar at inisip ko, oh my gosh, ayokong pumunta dito. Ay, hindi, yung number one rule sa atin as journalists, hindi natin ipuput yung sarili natin at risk. So parang, sir, hindi na lang po ako pupunta. So, hindi ako pumunta. Yun, so yun yung pinakasagabal sa pagkuha ng data. Pero gusto ko rin sanang mag-comment dun sa nabanggit kanina ni Miss Lesley na kailangan tayong maglabas ng magagandang kwento out there. And my favorite Facebook and Instagram account these days ay yung Ateneo Wild. And here they show a photo of a plant or an animal in the Loyola Heights campus. Tapos palaging merong cute and friendly and approachable na caption na nagbibigay sa iyo ng scientific information tungkol doon sa species na yun. And yun, parang na-amaze ako na right in the city merong ganitong species at parang hindi mo naman kailangan palaging agit or naninigaw, although may moments din na kailangan ganun yung atake mo. Pero pwede rin ganito na gentle and nakakatuwa lang yung messaging mo para mag-spread ng awareness about our flora and fauna. And I think kung mas alam mo ang isang bagay or aware ka sa isang bagay, lalo na right in your backyard, if you're from the city, mas poprotektahan mo to at mas pahahalagahan mo to, parang hindi kailangan hard sell palagi.
One of the things that I do appreciate about Masugi, I've been there with my family. I've so many friends who've been there. Is that the storytelling is immersive? You're right there, and I've always felt, I'm a UP mountaineer, and for the longest time, there's even among mountaineers, there's that debate. There are the OG mountaineers na, hindi, wag mong bubuksan ang trail dahil tingnan nyo nangyayari sa Sagada, diba? And at the same time, there are people naman, and I find myself here, of course, at camp, if people don't experience this, they will never fight for this. If they don't get to sleep under the stars, if they don't get to have the experience of washing yourself in the river or drinking from the river, nobody will appreciate. There's no intimate relationship. I think that's why a lot of us are so in love with wherever we went to college, because at some point, some of us spent the night in some open field in our universities and so on. So pinaglalaban mo yan. Same thing with But Billie, tell us about the power of not just storytelling, but being part of the story. I would imagine that's part of the real value of having places, not just a place, but places, kasi dumadami na, like Masungi, where people can go in and actually experience it on their own.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important now. Like, you can't protect what you don't love. So, and of course, not everybody is a scientist. Not everybody is a full daytime conservationist, right? So, like what Tricia said, important yung stories of hope and like even just cute animals, pictures of flowers blooming. Yung mga ganun eh, when you look at our socials sa Masungi, dalawa yung nakakakuha ng highest engagement, yung mga kakaibang animals like a tall flower or a unique vine, or second yung mga reports namin of violence. So we have to do both. Sometimes nakikita ko na rin na pag puro negative news yung nilalabas namin, hindi na rin masyadong na-engage yung mga tao. So you have to bring in those signs of hope and tell them na yes, nangyayari to, but there are things that we can do about it, no? And it's unfortunate lang na some studies, for example, say na mas kilala ng mga kabataan ngayon ang Pokemon kaysa yung sarili nating endemic animals. So yun yung tinatry namin i-break, no, na meron tayong mga kaibang hayop, mga halaman na dito lang sa Pilipinas talaga makikita. And we try to connect the scientists. I think that's one thing that we try to do. We connect scientists with the media. For example, we discovered a snail subspecies that can only be found in Masungi.
Wow.
3 years ginawa yun with the UPLB scientists. And what we did was connect it to a journalist. And, it was front page of the daily newspapers. Micro snail, that's one, like a grain of rice, right? Thrown up on the newspaper. And, yung happiness ng mga scientists that their work is shown, is kitang-kita mo. And we also use that data to fight for the protection, because if you quarry Masungi, a whole subspecies of snail will be gone. So, yun, it's how, not just how you tell the data, but how you use the data to further cause or kung ano yung gusto mong mangyari in terms of conservation.
Even the little stories make a difference, certainly. And certainly social media, especially even for people who don't have, at this point, it is still a luxury for a lot of people to even go out and experience. But Lesley,
Robbie, can I...
go ahead, Greg.
No, I just wanted to add na parang awareness is the first step, right? But in order to change behavior, we need to awaken that sense of agency and sense of responsibility. While it's true, yes, parang it awakens something, but many times people don't know how, what to do. And, remember in the economics of Gloria, where she would encourage local tourism by moving around the holidays. And that did raise awareness, but I wonder if people actually came away with a sense of responsibility. I still encounter people up to today who pick up shells, right? And I still have to tell them, there is this saying, diba? Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. Parang this is still not real for people. So parang after the awareness, we need to take the next step. In the same way, like how we go about business or selling something, right? If we are selling change, so you start from awareness, and then you get to desire, and then you get to interest, and then you get to action. So at the end of it, there has to be a call to action. And what's your role in that?
Give us an example. Balikan ko yung impact investment. Give me an example of an impact investment that ticks all boxes. Na positive impact, protected the environment, and kumita ka pa. So, challenge yung kumita ka pa. The truth is, marami pang hindi nag-scale, in terms of our enterprises. There are a couple on the tech side in the startup sphere, but on the impact side, and specific to the environment, like I was saying earlier, it's still a frontier area. We do have a couple of our investees, portfolio companies like Bagosphere, that is working to kind of disrupt education in the sense that you don't need to take a 4-year course to get into a decent job and move up the ladder, right? There are other ways to do it. So, and they're figuring out their business model. Abroad, madame, I would say, and there's inspiration there. Here, we did have, in terms of the environment, we invested in a fleet of electric vehicles, but the infrastructure is a challenge. So parang maliit lang yung rota niya kasi mayat-maya kailangan niya mag-charge. So hindi siya parang sa states na pwede mo na siyang dalhin whatever to Bicol kasi may mga charging stations all diba? So wala pa tayo doon. Marami pang kulang in terms of our infrastructure to help out these startups who are really working, many of them at the last mile or in conditions na parang they're still figuring out business models, hindi pa proven. And that's why they need impact investors, to help them with the experimentation. So yeah, I didn't really answer your question kasi mahirap yung kumikita na eh. But on the way. Yeah, Billie.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to give a sample of a campaign from awareness to action, right? Perfect. So this was back in 2020. A lot of people already know about Masumi. May naglagay ng fences. Apparently, it was quarry companies. There are 3 quarrying companies. We launched a campaign, an online petition that got almost 20,000 signatures. We posted on social media, right? And then after 8 days of social media campaigning, just asking people to repost, the Secretary of DNR, Secretary Simatu, removed the fences himself and announced that he will cancel the quarry. So that was a huge, right? A huge victory. 8 days of storytelling, tuloy-tuloy, media helped in, put it on the front page again, and then you get 1,300 hectares saved from quarry.
Yeah, but Billie, I do want, if you don't mind, Billie, one fundamental question that I do want to know: what's the nature of ownership of the land of Masumi? Is that private land? Is it LGU? Right. Because I want to know. Basically, what I want to answer is, how is Masumi possible? And yet parang it's not easily replicated.
And how do we duplicate that?
It's very hard to do something like this, and it was actually serendipitous how we came about something like this. So yung 430 hectares is actually part of a joint venture. It's a JVA in the early 1990s. So inequitize yung land of the government, and private sector financed the development of the land. And it was supposed to be like 30% development, 70% open spaces.
This is working with the LGU of
DNR.
DNR, okay.
DNR. It was DNR property, and then developing 30% to save the 70%. Kasi even then, marami ng encroachments na nangyayari. So Masumi was part of that 70%. It was essentially forest space inside a development. So it was a development project. And then in 2017, we signed a conservation agreement with Gina Lopez because she wanted us to restore. That project is being threatened right now. some sectors inside the NR wanted cancelled in favor of the vested interests like quarrying and land grabbing after all that we've done. So that's one thing that we are fighting for ngayong elections because we're worried na anytime pwedeng tigilin na yung efforts namin in the watershed.
So to be clear, this is in effect the private sector coming up with an innovative model, as you said, protect an area to protect the larger area around it. But ultimately, the contract is with government, with the national government.
Yes.
This is officially declared forest land.
One area is titled land, titled government property, and then the larger area is forest land, protected area.
I see. Okay, and then now an emerging risk is that even government can change its mind.
Apparently, dapat hindi, pero apparently there are stronger forces, and it's very political because it's a huge chunk of land that we're trying to conserve, and there are apparently more powerful forces there inside there. So we're doing the best we can in these next few weeks. Please watch out for us.
But this is
if you have a
example.
Campaign, we'll support.
Oh, I mean, but to that point, Greg, no, this is precisely the illustrative, I think, of what we were saying kanina, that if you have a campaign, no, even without me taking sides, right? If you have a campaign, I can imagine the tens of thousands of people who have literally walked Masungi are your allies.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the difference, diba? When you have people camping up in Sagada, diba? Whether you call them destructive or irresponsible campers or responsible campers or the best kinds of mountaineers, the reality is all of them are now proponents and champions of Sagada.
Exactly.
Same thing with you.
Yeah, like if a tree falls somewhere in a protected area far away, no one will hear it. But if a tree falls in Masungi, people will know about it. And that's why it's very powerful that we're able to develop these wild places, no, not just in Masungi, but in other areas of the Philippines. Sobrang ganda ng Pilipinas, daming beach, daming geological sites. If we're able to do that responsibly, I think it will be key to poverty, right? To other issues, problems in the Philippines. We have to unlock that potential. It has the power to lift us out of poverty, like other countries that have how much % of their biodiversity tourism, part of their GDP. It can be up to 40%.
Yeah, and Lesley, going back to Chico Dam and Maclean Dulag, it impacts not just on environment, but even on peace and order and the entire peace situation and peace talks even, di ba?
True, yeah. But I want to harp on what Billie and Tricia mentioned and a portion of what Greg mentioned. Na we're all doing our bits and pieces here, how to contribute for change, di ba? Pagbabago. Pero naisip ko rin na yung establishment, government that we are working with has also a greater pull. So how do we bring them in with all our respective initiatives? How do we get them to see our side without having to kill people, but to have that conversation? And na-realize ko na with that experience, pinento kanina ni Tricia, and I'm sure Rob, na-try mo rin to, na if you're dealing with government, pahirapan kumuha ng information. And I remembered a TV5 reporter interviewing me when I was in government. And it was a very sensitive topic kasi ang tanong niya, saan napunta yung pera ng Typhoon Yolanda? Ulit-ulit, diba? Because media was already talking about it. And my realization was, no one in government was mentioning kung saan napunta. No one was putting the information out there. So I started talking to our team and said, kailangan natin ma-inventory, di ba? Sino ba ang nag-donate? Saan ba napunta yung pera? And we put it together. Ang kwento is, kunyari 17 billion pesos yung dinonate ng lahat ng mga countries who wanted to help. Only 2 billion yung napunta sa government because the rest of the 14 billion nandun sa mga INGOs or NGOs na pinili ng mga donor countries. And the reason, they didn't trust that the government will bring the money to the beneficiaries. That's another story. But the main story is there has to be someone who would be forced to to inform the public, di ba?
Yeah.
And it just so happened na ako yung nasa hot seat at the time with the TV5 reporters, Carla. So ulit-ulit niyang tinanong. And I started explaining. And what I appreciated was that when the news came out, she studied. And point by point, hinighlight niya. And kwinento niya yung story. So ang flip side ngayon, fast forward 8 years after Typhoon Yolanda, ang advocacy ko now is teaching local government units to also give premium to communication, di ba?
Yeah.
Because always planning, financing, execution, procurement.
That's true.
But
That's a good
people
point.
forget na kailangan you put an information officer out there who will reach out, di ba? To the reporters, to social media, para ma-amplify yung kwento. And
that's a good point.
Maiwasan yung fake news, di ba?
That's a good point because PIOs tend to be cordon sanitaires.
Di ba? And then, kailangan natin sila i-push, especially the senior officials. And parte ng work. Pero kung hindi ako na-push at that time, parang I think I'll be pushing back, defending also, di ba? Or hiding things. Or the other aspect is hindi sila trained. Takot sila sa media. So, ang realization ngayon is, if we spare some funding, grant, or maybe an organization, reporters, or group of media practitioners who can be patient and teach government a way of storytelling na hindi lang propaganda. And turuan din sila na wag maging pikon if kausap yung reporter, di ba?
Well, one is Tricia will be calling you, okay matakot, when Tricia calls you for all of these stories that she's noting down. I agree with Lesley. Not just in terms of the mindset. Again, granting good faith with our government officials. I also feel the bigger problem is just lack of capacity and lack of training. I think if there were outreach to government agencies, to LGUs, to national agencies, to teach them, because usually, and I've done those, sometimes I've gotten invitations, can you do a communications workshop or a media workshop? And the training always tends to be, one, how do we write a press release? And two, can we practice an interview? And they will even craft it as kunwari matindi magtanong yung journalist. And therefore, ang pinapractice nila is how to parry or how to not escalate. Diba? But they're not actually trained to by themselves realize that I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
And I have stories. And let me also say, Greg, you might also appreciate this also. It's not just government that doesn't know how to storytell. Private sector also.
Yeah.
Companies, investors. Lahat ng press release is all about the balance sheet. Lahat ng press release is about financial performance. Nobody actually knows how to tell a story on this little boy who, because of a macro investment, here's a micro story. And that you can actually trace that impact to this investment.
Kailangan lang
come to
magpaturo
that,
si Billie and Tricia.
Sorry, I was just saying, may naisip na akong potentially, I think kumikita na siya, no, na for the environment. One of our portfolio companies, One Renewable, partnered with the local electricity co-op to provide a hybrid solution. So they already had like a generator providing electricity to Malalisan Island. But of course, hindi pa at parity with the grid, but also very expensive to connect them with the grid. And so not only was electricity not available 24/7, it was also very expensive. So with that solar solution overlaid on that existing infrastructure, napababa nila yung cost ng kuryente. And true enough, what our kind of theory was that with access to energy, so it was beyond electricity na, no? I mean, it's beyond light, no? So they started with solar lighting kits. And then they realized it's about electricity, charging your phones, etc., etc. And so also with that, you can buy refrigerators. And it stimulated economic activity. And so that is one good example of a social enterprise that sought out to, or an impact enterprise sought out to change something, make a difference, and actually make money.
And kumita pa.
Kumita pa.
Okay.
Yes.
Billy, kanina nabanggit, parang yung also the effect. You have one good impact, it also impacts all around you. What is the impact of Masungi on the larger community?
Yeah, well, the first is really on the people we have engaged directly, which are the park rangers. So, our park rangers are fully employed with us, meaning they receive their salaries on time, they have full benefits. Compare sa government rangers who receive some of them receiving their salaries nine months after, 1 year after.
Yeah.
No, so I think that's our primary focus. No, being able to train these rangers and not just train them in terms of how to speak, but yung values formation nila. We have trainings about that as well, and really knowing their purpose as part of the organization. So I think we've helped a lot of them gain personality and gain confidence in themselves. So some partners, for example, they work in Masungi muna before going to college. Or they work in Masungi muna before getting a more high-value tourism job. And we're very proud of that because na-train na sila in Masungi, even if they didn't graduate college, they graduate high school. Right? But because they have the confidence to talk to all these different people, to bring people, to manage a group properly, they've been able to do that.
Billy, can you tell us how much goes in, because we've been talking about storytelling and training people. I know that in many really successful ecotourism projects, the storytelling is a real investment. For example, I did the underwater river sa Palawan. Nakakatawa talaga yung di ba? Even the Firefly tour sa Palawan, nakakatawa. And then when I asked them, they said ABS-CBN Foundation sent comedy writers here to help us script. So yung ibang jokes nila, if you take the tour again and again, paulit-ulit yung joke. But if you take it isa lang, it's like Disneyland, di ba? Alam mo na that was a canned, alam na nila yun, di ba? But how much investment goes into your tours in the literal storytelling, in the script, if any, of your guides?
Oh yeah, well, first, I think it will come from this una yung scientific studies. Talagang we engage scientists to study ano ba yung mga puno dito sa makikita dito.
So facts first. Facts first,
yeah. And then tsaka namin binibuild yung spiel, and building the spiel and training the rangers takes a lot of time. It could take 3 months to change the spiel. Ganun kahirap in terms of developing it.
Hindi pumenta yung joke, ganun.
Getting feedback, but that's something that I haven't heard before. We can get comedy writers to put some humor into the script, and that's something that we do need to change because it's been 5 years since we opened, and I think we have the same spiel for the Rangers. So medyo paulit-ulit na. So we're gonna try to work on that, revising and updating.
Kasi yung sa I remember that Firefly tour in Palawan, the guides are trained not just in the flora and fauna around them, not just on the fireflies, not just on the flora and fauna in the water, but they're even trained in reading the constellations. So they will point out the constellation. So, and all of that, kita mo, parang I guess the point here is that even the storytelling takes investment. It's a real investment.
It's a deliberate work, hindi siya just out of nowhere.
Lesley, if we zoom out, however, diba, the importance still of storytelling. We've talked about the power of even the small stories. But when I was starting as a reporter, the big stories were really negative. Diba? I remember, ang report lang namin, this was in the 90s, ang report lang namin parata is the forest cover of the Philippines used to be 90% in the turn of the century, and now we are in the 1970s. It is down to 60%. Primary growth forests are down now to 20%. 5 years later, it's down to 10%. So puro ganyan. Yeah. Over the past 30 years, meron ba as you said, we want some good news stories as well. Are there macro stories that we can tell that are on the good and brighter side?
I think so. And there should be. So recently, merong Understanding Risk Conference, UR. And part of the parang storytelling, ang bulk of it was hindi lang yung science of understanding risk, but also communicating. And how do you simplify the science and the facts so that people will understand? And isa sa mga sessions doon is making headlines. And parang ginawa niyang interactive. So may mga tao na pinapagawa ng headline. And ang pinakapatok na headline was yung hopeful na headline about COVID pandemic recovery. And diba? So it's not just the negative stories, I think, that we were so used to 10, 20 years ago. So right now, as mentioned by Billie, Tricia, and even Greg, na pumapatok yung positive stories. So if we talk about climate change, pwedeng may positive spin ang climate change. But we need to have more imagination among the scientists, among the practitioners, para hindi lang yung technical aspect yung tinitingnan. And also, that's a challenge, diba, sa mga specialists, technical experts natin. How do we try to capture the imagination of the people as well as yung audience with a very limited word count?
Naalala ko lang, dagdag ko lang yung mga horror stories back when I was covering. Kasi nabanggit kanina ni Billie yung mga forest rangers. When I was covering the environment in the 1990s, I remember one of the most shocking numbers that I heard. And I don't know, Lesley, or any if you can just pull the updated number out of your hat. But I'm also thinking, I don't know if this might jog any inspiration with you, Greg, in terms of investors and how technology can be investment, can be an intervention here. I remember, in terms of forest rangers, when I was covering the environment before, the number of forest rangers, and that was by definition government employees, diba? Whether at the local level or the provincial or it was something ridiculous, something like one forest ranger for every 20,000 hectares. Wow. Something like that. One forest ranger for something basically as big or not as Manila. As Manila City. And then, wala. You get to the highest point, tumingin ka na lang kung saan may nagsisiga. But essentially, that was it. Is there any update to numbers like that that can make us feel like, or for that matter, are there interventions in this space? Are there investments in this space? Are there developments in this space where we can all feel like at least we are all monitoring even better?
Di ako sure kung may numbers si Billie or si Tricia. I don't have the numbers. Meron ka, Bill?
Research. The average number right now is 1:4,000 hectares of protected area.
Wow.
While you were asking that question ba, nasa mind ko, 1:4,000. So ang question ko, nadadagdagan ba yung forest rangers natin or nababawasan yung protected areas natin sinira na?
Masaklap. Baka next year, 1:2,000. Kasi,
but diba, Greg, I mean, and Billie, when you factor in how ecotourism and also smartphone technology and how you now have more people penetrating all of these areas and going on these adventures, there must be some kind of an investment opportunity there where you turn our people into, the official guardians as well. I would imagine maybe we're not all officially marshaled and deputized forest rangers, but now you literally have billions of eyes in every corner of the land.
So Well, in the international conservation field, we have this term called privately protected areas, and OECMs are other effective conservation measures that are area-based. So these have proven to not only help fill the gaps of government in terms of managing these wild spaces, but they have also proven to be good oversight for what's really happening inside the forest, because you have third-party people who are actually, making bantay lahat ng forest, because there's so many things that's happening inside that, not a lot of people know about. So in the Philippines, we have an 80% funding gap for biodiversity conservation. But to be able to do that, we have to expand, something like Masumi, where an NGO is handling X hectares of land and, engaging the rangers for that sake and sharing in the responsibility. So, syempre, that needs to be, upheld, that needs to be supported and incentivized. But, yun nga, may mga vested interests that somehow, instead of supporting what we do, somehow, for some reason, and the government itself sometimes wants to sell off the land na lang to other things like farming. So those are the barriers to that. And I hope legislation also supports, kasi in Brazil and in other countries like Costa Rica, they incentivize the NGOs. Some actually give grants, the National Heritage Grants in Germany. I think in Indonesia or Malaysia, they've given stewardship to groups that have track record. So of course, not just any group, to be able to fill that gap. Kasi grabe yun, yung 1:4,000 hectares, 80% funding gap. The answer is innovation lang and involving other sectors into that mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I just want to share, this concept of blended finance, right? So definitely impact investing, that's not a silver bullet, and we have to work together. So we need to bring in more capital, and grant money is a form of capital. So it can be a combination of grant and then investors, the government, some kind of subsidy, so that then it becomes more sustainable. And we're seeing this problem in agriculture, in fisheries. Why don't our farmers want their children to become farmers? I was speaking recently with someone who was looking at the Marikina shoe industry, and it's the same. Our cobblers are older. Their kids don't want to get into the craft because there's no money. And the mindset of many parents is that, mag-abogado ka, mag-doktor ka, mag-ganyan ka, because the money is there, right? So how then do we create models, not just business models, but sustainable models, so that, and even our nurses, right? The people stay, the people have a decent, can earn decently, and also there's some kind of path. And, I think people want to get into work that is fulfilling, but we also have to address the economic side of it. How do we do that? And, with investments, like even like the Masungi model, right? Like a private, public-private partnership. Maybe we can figure out a good template for that. And what does that look like?
And you're right, diba? Parang all you need is one model. And then suddenly people are inspired. I remember having this conversation with a friend precisely along those same lines. Parang, bakit kawawa naman ng mga farmers and ang mga lupa natin when the children of the farmers don't want to become farmers, and therefore how do we convince them? But I told them, teka muna, let's be honest with each other. Do you want your child to be a farmer? Diba? Then how can you make that argument for them? But I think somewhere in your point is that answer as well, that actually it's not that I don't want my children to be farmers. If I am aware of the model, I might want them to be farmers.
If it's economically feasible.
Diba?
Why
if
not?
I know the models, diba? So again, it still boils down to awareness, not just about the problems, but awareness about the opportunities.
Then maybe it leads to some kind of reverse migration, right? And less stress on highly urbanized areas.
True. But I'm gonna jump into what you mentioned, Rob, and si Greg kanina, and si Billie din, na, di ba, meron namang model, yung Masungi Reserve. So I think right now when asked, di ba, gusto mo ba ng pagbabago? Gusto. In this aspect of the long fight for our planet, paano? Where do you start? And I think there is an opportunity here. Kasi yung recovery from the pandemic, ang pandemic taught us a lot of things. And one thing na crucial is, ang highlight is when we travel now, people would want a good experience, a quality experience. And you're willing to pay more because of social distancing, di ba? Yung safety and making sure that the protocols are in place. So this is a good opportunity to pitch na it's not just quantity. You're helping the carrying capacity, you're talking about quality, experience, sustainability, and making sure that the people in the area would also benefit, yung communities. Yeah. And how do you bring in yung private sector to invest, to help? So, isang aspect yung COVID-19 pandemic na recovery, that's an entry point. The other one is yung recent typhoon. Ito yung hindi nakikita ng government. They keep on talking about contribution to GDP ng tourism sector. 12.8% ang contribution to GDP. But when your 5 top destinations, Palawan, Cebu, Bohol, Siargao, and other areas are hit by Typhoon Odette, how do you begin to recover? And how do you bring in the tourists to do that? Diba? And to put in the money to visit the areas. So in terms of rebuilding and reconstruction, there is an opportunity for Billie, for Tricia, for Greg to talk about some of these innovative and sustainable solutions that we can bring in to sustainable, inclusive, and resilient tourism destinations.
I wonder... Sorry, go ahead.
Go, Belle.
Oh, I just wonder, Ms. Lesley, if you knew anything about how Siargao is rebuilding right now, because some of my friends who transferred there during the pandemic are saying that they're now building concrete foundations on top of the natural structure. So I'm just wondering how is Siargao rebuilding?
So right now, they're still planning. So we had a privilege because that's part of the area we're looking at, and we're particular, diba? You don't just destroy your natural environment, and we also push for nature-based solutions, diba? For coastal resilience, and ang pinaka-stopgap, if you bring in Department of Public Works in the rebuilding, is concrete agad, diba? Cemento. So how do you tell them, pause a bit, let's plan it better? And we need not just the World Bank telling them that, but also yung mga communities in the area, plus yung mga NGOs in the area. And helpful, the powerful voices of these people who would say, ayaw namin ng ganyan. We want to do it and rebuild this area the way it was, diba? To preserve the whole ecosystem. So, but I think kailangan tulungan, pati yung mga local tourism promotion development in the areas, engaging the communities for enterprise and training them. Kailangan hindi lang yung one size fits all ng DTI or ng DOT, yung, diba, ibibigay natin. Kailangan pag-isipan. And then training yung mga tourist guides to tell those stories also, similar to what's done in Palawan or in Masuging Geo-Reserve.
Lesley, thank you for bringing up the title of this program, because I'll use that also to prompt towards the end of closing our program. Yung title ng program is not gusto mo ba ng pagbabago, because it's so easy to answer. The answer for everyone, I'll say it, is yes. The title was really deliberate and talk about storytelling. We did think about that. That's why the title is Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. ... And that's how I'll prompt the four of you as a final question. How would you complete that sentence? Learning, knowing what you know now, and still not knowing some things you still are experiencing. But what do you say to people? What do you say to young people especially? Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, ano?
Nagmumuni-muni pa ako.
Muni-muni pa.
Gusto ko deep.
Hindi ako oldest, pero gusto ko mag-start.
Sige, Lesley. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, anong advice mo?
Gusto ko ng pagbabago, I need to do my share. And I don't have to do extraordinary things, I think. Diba? Parang I just need to do the ordinary things extraordinarily well. And nahirapan lang ako itagalog siya kasi Bisaya. Flip side to what I am doing right now, Greg mentioned na bakit paulit-ulit tayo in terms of nagugulat tayo pag may large-scale disasters, di ba? We all know na this is bound to happen. Ang tanong lang is kailan. And I need to do my part to continue pushing government, working closely with government, the different stakeholders like NGOs, academia, communities, and private sector to look at innovative ways of doing it and to be consistent, to find solutions na simple pero hindi magawa-gawa because of interests. So how do you break through those issues and concerns for government to listen? And kada disaster, nandyan ako, aside from nagpapautang ako for disaster response and recovery efforts, how do you push them to think of policies that will help transform? And hindi lang limited sa national government, but also to reach out to local government and the communities. And nakikita ko na meron namang progress, pero very slow. So mas marami na yung namamatay kaysa progress ng ginagawa. But to remain steadfast, and conversations like this, seeing Billie, si Greg, si Rob, si Joyce, Tricia, na like-minded, doing your own things towards a common goal makes a difference. So, even if pagod na, kung gusto ko ng pagbabago, I think kailangan kong gawin to. In my own sphere, in my own sector.
Kung may sagot na ako. Related to that, para sa akin, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, kailangan magpakatao ka. Kailangan mong mag-seek ng connections to go out there and again have conversations like this one, meet people where they are and to form bonds. And kaya ko to nasasabi kasi yung isa sa mga highlights nung aking journalism career ay nakasama ko sa isang trip ng DNR at saka BFAR sa Benham Rice. Siyempre, proud ako sabihin, nagpunta ako ng Benham Rice, pero tubig lang siya talaga. Wala kang makikita, tubig lang siya. Kailangan mong sumisid para may makita kang life, marine life. And it was a 20-hour boat ride to this resource-rich area. Pero yung mga mangingisda na nakasama namin, kailangan nilang mag-take ng 36-hour boat ride from Quezon papunta ng Benham Rice para lang makakuha sila ng isda. Kasi doon sa municipal waters or yung malapit doon sa coast, konti na lang yung na-fish nila. So they have to go farther so that they can get more fish agad as opposed to spending days fishing sa municipal waters kasi nga ubos na yung isda. And nung nakita ko yung pinagdaanan nila, parang nag-create yon para sa akin ng compassion para sa kanila. Nagkaroon ako ng empathy para sa kanila. At gusto ko silang ipaglaban, lalo na tinataboy sila ng mga foreign fishers. Delikado na nga to go out at sea. Tapos dagdagan mo pa ng mga foreign na fishers na tinataboy sila. And nasabi ko nga kanina na kung alam mo yung isang bagay, kung aware ka tungkol sa isang bagay, mas pahahalagahan mo siya, mas poprotektahan mo siya, and mas ipaglalaban mo siya. So, yun, let's seek these connections and be human. I thank you.
I can go next. Before answering the question, parang what can I do, or what can we do as individuals? I also just wanted to share in terms of the macro. There is this law now, the Philippine Natural Resources Bill. I don't know if it's been passed, but the idea, and this is something that I've kind of been questioning being in investment, na parang the balance sheet, as you were saying, Robbie, it's just a balance sheet. So one of the biggest retailers in the world threw out X amount of merchandise. Kasi naka-zero na siya sa zero book value. And they just threw it out. And so parang we're not really taking into account, say, how do we make our natural resources, our biodiversity, our coral reefs visible, so that then it is part of our balance sheet, right? And so that law makes it possible. So I just wanted to highlight that as some kind of good news. Of course, having a law is one thing, but hopefully when LGUs, and it was Dean Tony actually who shared this in another webinar, where an LGU was considering some kind of factory, but the coral reefs would be affected. And they actually did the numbers, kind of doing a valuation on the coral reefs, and they found out that the coral reefs were more valuable, and therefore they were able to stop this project. So, I think in connection with that, continue to be vigilant, to seek opportunities, to do an honest audit on our own lives, and what can we change. So definitely it starts with us, diba? But also have the courage to speak up. When I speak with entrepreneurs, and even my own experience, one of the hardest things is to change the minds of people in your own backyard. So like some of these entrepreneurs are trying to do zero waste. Wag i-segregate natin yung basura, wag natin itapon, but in their own household, di nila, ang hirap mag-convince ng mga tao, right? So parang, what can we do on our own, but also beyond ourselves? We have a voice, we have a power, we have the power, so we need to, as Tricia was saying very well, have that empathy, but also have courage to speak up and to believe that we can do something, right? That with what we're doing, even if it's small, if there are a lot of us, again, another story na parang this, diba? Parang this person who was walking along the shore and throwing starfishes back into the sea. And parang tinanong siya, ang dami-dami niyan, why? Why do you even do it? Sabi niya, well, parang it doesn't matter. Sabi niya, well, it mattered to that one. So everything that we do matters. And we need to build an energy and the momentum around that so that, collectively, we can make something happen.
Ikaw, Billie, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago.
Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, maghanap ka ng huwaran or ng model or role model. So this goes out to all the listeners natin na kung gusto mong mahanap kung paano ka magko-contribute sa mga problema sa kalikasan, I think one way to start is to find your own role model, find yung mga huwaran within your community, within the international community, whom you can emulate and whose journeys can inspire you to take on your own journey in this global mission. And you can find some of them here right now. For example, si Ms. Greg, who is empowering entrepreneurs through the power of innovation and entrepreneurship. Ms. Lesley, who has worked on disaster risk management and is working with the high-level government and private sector to make things happen. Tricia, who is telling stories about our fishermen, and Leonard Ko, who need more exposure, and of course, Sir Robbie, who is leading storytelling in this new platform and podcast. So I think some of them are already here, and I hope na ma-inspire tayo to take on our own paths with our own skills and opportunities to contribute to the environment movement.
And you, Billie, who are blazing the trail and proving a model for others to follow.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody na kasama namin dito sa pag-organize. I'd like to thank Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, Bukas Conversations for Action and Youth-led. Asia Society Philippines, first and foremost, also for helping to bridge us to the Asia Society Young Leaders, two of whom are part of our panel Greg Perez of Exchange and Lesley Cordero of World Bank. Maraming salamat. Billie Dumaliang of the Masungi G Reserve, and also, of course, Tricia Aquino, my colleague and co-founder at Puma Podcast. Maraming salamat. And thank you to everyone who's watching. If you found this useful, share it with a friend. Abangan ang susunod na episode na kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, the Chito Gascon Leadership Series. The highlights of our last episode are now available in podcast form on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Just search kung gusto mo ng pagbabago. And for the other full discussions that we've had with Tedte, with Sheila Coronel, with Risa Ontiveros, and other young change leaders, you can search for that as well in video form dun sa Facebook page ng Asia Society Philippines. And all of those will then be abridged and then come out in podcast form via Puma Podcast as well. So watch out for those on Spotify or wherever you podcast. So muli, maraming salamat po sa Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, Bukas Conversations for Action, and Youth Leadership for Democracy or Youth-Led. At sa inyong lahat, maraming salamat po.